The Ellington family's lake house looked like a postcard from the outside cedar siding, wraparound deck, and a view of the Vermont waterline that drew our relatives in every summer. Inside, it was a wall of noise, uncles arguing about fishing, cousins chasing each other down the hallway. My mother, Evelyn, holding court in the kitchen with a glass of wine in hand. I'd learned long ago that the safest place for me at these gatherings was somewhere quiet, preferably out of Kellen's line of sight. My older brother thrived in these settings. Every story he told seemed to grow more outrageous, every laugh he got feeding the glint in his eyes. From the couch, I watched him hold a small crowd near the fireplace, acting out some fraternity prank. "Look who's creeping out of the shadows," he called when he spotted me. His grin was wide, but his tone had an edge I recognized. "Careful. Everyone Maris is on the move. Better lock up the silverware." A few people chuckled. I kept my head down, heading toward the staircase. "Remember Christmas." When she took out Grandma's china cabinet, he continued, voice rising so everyone could hear. "Cost Dad, what, $3,000? "It was an accident," I said quietly without turning back. "That's the thing about you. Sis, everything's an accident." I reached the bottom step, hoping he'd stay where he was. But his footsteps followed. By the time I hit the landing, he was right behind me. Running away again. His voice had dropped, close enough that I could feel his breath at my ear. "I'm just tired," I said. "You're always tired." He stepped around me, blocking the next flight of stairs. Arms stretched across the railing. "You can't pass. Dragons guarding the castle." It was an old game from when we were kids, but there was nothing playful in his eyes. I tried to duck under his arm. His hands hit my shoulders hard. The shove knocked the breath out of me before my body pitched backward. The stairs blurred, wood against spine. A sharp twist mid-fall. I heard the crack before the pain hit, flat on my back, staring at the ceiling. I tried to move my legs. Nothing. Above me, footsteps thundered. Evelyn's voice cut through the din. "Maris, get up. You're fine." Kellen's voice came next, casual and cold. "Just a joke." The carpet scratched against my neck as I lay there, trying to make sense of the pain that seemed to pulse from the base of my spine outward. Voices carried from the dining room laughter, the clink of cutlery, the same cheerful chaos as before. My fall hadn't stopped the party. It had just shifted it a few feet away from me. Kellen leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching me like I was part of the evening's entertainment. "It was just a joke," he said to no one in particular, but loud enough for the room to hear. "She's milking it." Evelyn swept in, heels clicking on the hardwood, wine glass still in hand. Her eyes skimmed over me like I was a dropped napkin. "Maris, honestly, you're ruining the evening. People came here to relax, not to watch you sulk on the floor." "I can't move my legs," I said, my voice thin. Grant appeared behind her, smelling faintly of cigars. "You've always been too sensitive," he muttered, as if that explained everything. Across the room, Aunt Ruth sat stiffly on the arm of a sofa, her gaze flicking between me and the others. She didn't speak, but her unease was written all over her face. 8-year-old Lily, Ruth's granddaughter, broke away from the pack of younger cousins and crept over to me. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, her big brown eyes round with worry. "Yes," I whispered back. "Then why aren't they helping?" I had no answer. "I need a doctor," I said louder, forcing my voice to carry. "Something's wrong." Grant shook his head. "We're not wasting ER bills on theatrics. You'll be fine in an hour." Ruth shifted like she might stand, but Evelyn shot her a look that rooted her back in place. Lily squeezed my hand before her mother called her away. I stared at the ceiling, heat rising behind my eyes. The numbness in my legs was spreading, a cold tide creeping upward. I tried once more to push myself up, and white-hot pain shot through my back, stealing my breath. somewhere beyond the ringing in my ears. I heard Marcy's voice from the dining room sharp, cutting through the chatter. Enough. I'm calling 911 from my place on the floor. I could see the dining table crowded with plates and glasses, the warm light catching on polished silver. I was shivering now, though the room felt stifling every time I tried to shift. Pain ripped down my spine. Marcy, my cousin by marriage, caught my eye. She was halfway through a bite of roasted chicken when she stopped chewing, her gaze narrowing. She set down her fork, stood, and walked over. Mary's... You're shaking, she said quietly. I can't feel my legs, I whispered, before I could say more. Grant's voice cut in from across the room. She's fine. Marcy, don't encourage this. Marcy didn't break eye contact with me. I'm calling 911. You're not, Grant snapped, his tone sharp enough to silence the table. No one calls. This isn't an emergency. Marcy pulled her phone from her pocket. Sit down, Grant, or stand there and watch me do it. Her voice was steady, almost bored, but her knuckles were white around the phone. The call took less than a minute. By the time she hung up, Evelyn was already working herself into a performance, lamenting how this would ruin the whole weekend. When the paramedics arrived, their calm efficiency cut through the noise. I felt their gloved hands checking my pulse, my breathing, asking me questions I could barely answer. Grant and Evelyn hovered nearby, objecting to everything. She's overreacting, Evelyn insisted, one of the medics, a tall man with kind eyes, gently lifted the hem of my sweater. His face tightened almost imperceptibly. These aren't from today, he murmured to his partner, just low enough for me to hear. The woman nodded, her eyes scanning the mottled bruises along my ribs. Possible spinal injury, she said, then added under her breath, and a history of something else. The man straightened, his voice even, better call the police. The ambulance ride blurred past in fragment sirens somewhere above me, clipped radio chatter, the weight of the brace around my neck. At the hospital, they wheeled me straight into a bright room where a woman in scrubs introduced herself as Dr. Patel. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Assessing. We're going to do a full-body MRI, she said. Given your symptoms, I want to see everything. They transferred me to a narrow table. The machine's clanging started almost immediately, each metallic thud echoing through my bones. I closed my eyes, but the image of Kellen's smirk kept breaking through the dark. When it was over, Dr. Patel returned with a tablet in hand. She pulled a chair close to my bed. This, she said, pointing to a glowing white arc on the image, is your L3 vertebra. There's a compression fracture here, today's injury. But, her finger moved to other spots, ghostly outlines of ribs and spine. These are older. This one, maybe 2 months old. This, 6 months. And here she tapped near my upper back at least a year. I stared at the images, the proof I'd never had before. Kellen, I said quietly, from his games. Her expression didn't change, but there was a stillness to it now. Maris, these aren't games. This is repeated trauma. She stood, speaking softly into her phone by the doorway. I caught the words CPS and police. When she came back, she sat beside me again. I've contacted Child Protective Services and law enforcement. Someone will come talk to you. You've been hurt, and we take that seriously. I felt my throat tighten. No one had ever said those words to me before. Dr. Patel's voice softened. We believe you. A knock sounded at the door, and a woman with a notepad stepped in. The woman with the notepad introduced herself as Tessa Myers from Child Protective Services. She pulled a chair close to the bed, her movements measured, her voice steady. Maris, I know Dr. Patel has already spoken to you, but I need to hear your history in your own words. Any injuries, any incidents you remember. At first, The words stuck. Years of being told I was clumsy made it hard to frame what had happened as anything else. But Tessa waited, patient and unflinching, until the silence cracked. I told her about the bike chain Kellen loosened when I was 13, the fall in the cafeteria he'd caused, the roughhousing that left me with bruised ribs. She wrote it all down, no change in expression, but I could see the way her pen pressed harder with each detail. A knock interrupted us. Aunt Ruth stepped inside, her eyes darting to the hallway before she closed the door. She carried a manila envelope and set it on the rolling tray. "I should have done this years ago," she said, her voice low. "These are from family gatherings, holidays, birthdays. You probably didn't even know I kept them." I pulled out the photographs me at the 4th of July barbecue, a shadow of purple along my upper arm, Christmas 2 years ago, my smile tight, a faint mark visible under concealer, another from a cousin's birthday, long sleeves on a 90-degree day, before I could speak. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Marcy, "Check your email now." Tessa opened the attached video on her tablet. The screen filled with a shot of the lake house staircase, filmed at an angle like the person holding the phone was focused on something else. In the background, Kellen stepped in front of me, said something inaudible, then shoved. The camera jolted, but my fall was still clear. Tessa's eyes stayed on the screen until it ended. "This changes things," she said. 10 minutes later, a uniformed officer entered to take a statement. When he left, I overheard him telling Dr. Patel they'd be upgrading the charge from simple assault to aggravated assault. Somewhere in the hallway, the sound of my mother's voice rose, sharp and frantic. By the next morning, the hospital television was looping a segment from the local morning show. Evelyn sat on a couch beside Grant, her posture perfect, a tissue clutched in her manicured hand. She dabbed at her eyes as the host leaned in sympathetically. "Our daughter has struggled for years," Evelyn said, her voice trembling just enough. "We've tried therapy, special attention, everything. But she's always been jealous of Kellen's success." Grant nodded solemnly. "These accusations, they're coming from a place of resentment. She's always been accident-prone. We have medical records going back years. This latest fall is just another unfortunate mishap she's blaming on someone else." I turned the TV off before the segment ended, but the damage was already spreading. By midday, my phone, still in the possession of hospital staff, was buzzing nonstop with alerts. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years were posting vague comments about family loyalty on social media. The one thing my parents hadn't accounted for was the paper trail. Amanda Raines, the prosecutor assigned to my case, requested a brief meeting that afternoon. She walked in with a slim folder and a level gaze. "I figured they'd try this," she said, placing the folder on my tray table. Inside were printouts, excerpts from my medical records, photographs of the MRI scans, and one still image from Marcy's video, the frame where Kellen's hands are on my shoulders, his expression anything but playful. "I'm releasing these to the press," Amanda said. "Not the full video yet, but enough to show there's evidence. I've also included a statement on the medical findings. Fractures in multiple stages of healing are not the result of clumsiness." That evening, a different kind of news segment aired. The still image stayed on screen for nearly a full minute as the anchor read Amanda's statement. Reporters repeated phrases like pattern of injury and inconsistencies in family's account. By nightfall, Kellen's fraternity announced his expulsion. His college issued a suspension pending the criminal case. The comments online began to shift, not all in my favor, but enough to pierce the wall my parents were trying to build. Lying in the dim hospital room, I heard voices in the hallway, Evelyn's sharp with anger, Grant's low and tense, followed by the sound of the door opening. Amanda came back the next morning, this time with Tessa from CPS. I had a stack of spiral notebooks on my lap, their covers bent from years of being hidden under loose floorboards and in the back of drawers. I handed them over without hesitation. "They're dated," I said. "Every time something happened, I wrote it down what he did, what my parents said afterward. Tessa flipped through one, her eyes catching on a page where my handwriting was jagged and slanted. "This is detailed," she said quietly. "We can use this." Later that afternoon, Amanda returned with news. "We've added neglect charges for your parents," she said, "and I've tracked down 2 of Kellen's ex-girlfriends. Both say they experienced similar behavior shoving, trapping them in rooms, grabbing too hard. They're willing to testify. It was strange hearing about his violence toward others, like pieces of a puzzle I'd been staring at my whole life finally fitting into place. In the rehab wing, my physical therapist, Marcus, met me with a pair of parallel bars. "Let's see what you can do," he said. The first time I put weight on my legs, the pain was sharp enough to make my vision blur. Marcus stayed close, ready to catch me if I faltered, one step at a time. He said, "Each movement felt like pushing against everything my family had told me too sensitive, too dramatic, too weak." I gritted my teeth and took another step, my hands gripping the bars so hard my knuckles ached. By the end of the session, sweat ran down my back, but I was upright. It wasn't much, but it was mine. When I got back to my room, Amanda was waiting with a folder in hand. "The court date's set," she said. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected, the air thick with quiet murmurs as I took my seat at the witness stand. Amanda gave me a brief nod before stepping forward. "Maris, can you tell us about your relationship with your brother?" I spoke slowly, making sure each word was steady. I told them about the years of shoves, trips, accidents that left bruises and broken bones, the times I'd tried to speak up and been called dramatic. I described the fall at the lake house in detail, my hands clenched in my lap to keep them from shaking. When Amanda finished, Kellen's attorney, Mr. Harlan, rose with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Isn't it true you've been treated for anxiety and depression?" "Yes," I said, "because being abused is depressing." He tried to frame my journals as exaggerations, suggested I misremembered events. "Perhaps these incidents didn't happen the way you think," he said. "The MRI doesn't lie," I replied, "and neither does the video." Amanda called the first witness Tara, one of Kellen's ex-girlfriends. She kept her gaze on the jury as she said. He pushed me down a flight of stairs. Gasps rippled through the room. 2 more witnesses followed a former teammate describing Kellen's temper, a neighbor recalling shouting matches that ended with slamming doors and crying. Finally, Kellen took the stand. "It was roughhousing," he said, shrugging. "Siblings fight." "I never meant to hurt her." Amanda leaned on the podium. "So, you admit you put your hands on her." He shifted in his seat. I might have lost my temper. Her voice stayed even. "You lost your temper, and your sister ended up with a fractured spine. That's not roughhousing. Mr. Ellington? That's violence." Kellen's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. When I left the stand, I caught the eye of a juror who gave the faintest nod. Amanda's closing statement was still to come. The jury was out for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the room, no one moved. I kept my hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on the foreperson, guilty on all counts. She said aggravated assault, pattern of abuse, violation of the restraining order. Each word landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the courtroom. Kellen stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Amanda's expression didn't change, but her shoulders eased just slightly. The judge moved quickly through sentencing 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, mandatory registration as a violent offender. Then it was my parents' turn. Neglect and endangerment probation, parenting classes, court-mandated therapy. Evelyn's perfectly made-up face didn't flinch until the gavel fell, outside the courtroom. The hallway was crowded with reporters and family members. I was halfway to the exit when Evelyn stepped in front of me. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice low but shaking with fury. "I'm free," I told her. "That's enough." She blinked once, as if she hadn't expected an answer. then turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd. Amanda appeared at my side. "We'll talk next week about the restitution hearing," she said. I nodded, but my mind was already somewhere else away from this building, away from their voices. I walked toward the doors, the winter air spilling in through the glass as someone held it open. Aunt Ruth was waiting at the bottom of the steps. I moved into Aunt Ruth's house 2 weeks after the verdict. She'd already cleared a room, painted the walls a soft gray, and put fresh sheets on the bed. It wasn't just space, it was safety. Therapy started right away, this time with someone who listened instead of diagnosing me with oversensitivity. We worked through the memories one by one, dismantling the reflex to explain away my pain. By spring, I'd written an essay I titled "The Fall That Saved My Life." Amanda helped me place it in a national outlet. Within days, my inbox filled with messages from people who'd grown up with their own golden child sibling, from parents who'd realized too late they'd missed the signs. It became the foundation for my advocacy work. I spoke at schools, shelters, and community centers, telling my story in the hope it might pry open the silence for someone else. Each time I stood in front of an audience, I remembered what it felt like to lie on that floor, unheard, and I spoke louder. A year later, I moved into my college dorm, on my first night. I stood at the bottom of the central staircase, looking up. My chest tightened, but not from fear. I climbed slowly, each step steady, the wood solid under my feet. At the top, my phone buzzed, a text from my cousin Lily. "My teacher read your article in class. She says you're a hero." I smiled and typed back, "Not a hero, just someone who told the truth." Then I walked down the hall toward my room, the laughter of new friends spilling from an open doorway, and let the sound pull me forward.